Everything works. I mean, I'm obviously much more impressed by the fact that everything works than anything else. It could be worse. So we're going to talk today about Project Flogo, and as we're talking about it in public, and because our European CTO is here, I did have to have our confidentiality and disclaimer. So for the TIBCO folks in here, we are going to have a quiz on this. So the good thing is we covered this already. Who am I? Yeah, I know. It's the same bad picture. Absolutely, absolutely. So I wanted to start off with a quick question. Who identifies themselves here as a developer? Good. We have a few. Who identifies themselves as operations and making stuff run? Okay, good. We have a few as well. So whoever takes the role that their manager says they have to do. Guys, come on. I would expect literally every hand now. Otherwise, I have to have a talk with your managers, and I know some of them. No, that's good. I just wanted to have a feel of what kind of audience I have today. So what are we going to talk about? I mean, we're going to talk about how we're moving from monoliths to microservices and to functions. And obviously, serverless is going to be part of that. So what is serverless all about? And probably more importantly, why do I care? And obviously, when I say why do I care, I mean, why should you care? Why is it important for us? And the third, but probably not least important thing is when, where, why use serverless. I mean, as Mauricio said during his introduction, serverless isn't the silver bullet. It's not going to solve all of the problems that exist in the world today. I mean, it's not going to end world hunger. It would be super awesome if it did, though. But it doesn't. So let's talk a bit about that first part, going from monoliths to microservices and to function as a service. And with that, I want to take a trip down memory lane. Who here has been in IT for, let's say, 10, 15 years, or even longer than that? That's a relatively high percentage. That's good, that's good. So when I say things like service-oriented architecture, ESB, then that sounds familiar to everyone. Sorry? Mainframe, yes, lovely, thank you. That's probably the world's first monolith that ever existed. But you're absolutely right. And I mean, when you look at it, till about 10 years ago, everything that we did was a monolith. I mean, up until that time, we never had systems communicate with each other. And you know what? That was actually pretty okay back then. And in fact, some of the systems that we all built together still are monoliths. And maybe that is okay. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it is. And as you look at it, a lot of brilliant people tried to come up with a more distributed architecture. They tried to break apart systems and let those systems communicate with each other. And the problem we had, let's say a decade ago, was that computers weren't fast enough, the network wasn't fast enough, the protocols that we came up with things like SOAP and XML, or I should say XML and SOAP, they were heavily loaded with a bunch of overhead that made everything a lot more complex. So we ended up in a situation where CPUs were too slow, the messages that weren't flowing fast enough, and essentially we were building mini monoliths. So we were building technology in a way that we've said a year before, well, this isn't going to work, and we were just replicating that on a larger scale. Problem with that, obviously, is that we had to come up with something that does work. And luckily, as time progressed, we came up with a ton of awesome technology. I mean, our networks were a lot faster. I mean, we're at a gigabit speed right now, or at least I hope we are here in this building. I mean, I trust the technology here. CPUs have become a lot more powerful. I mean, we have octo cores and even going even further in our laptops today even. We obviously came up with things like REST and REST architectures and JSON as a payload. And if you look at things like gRPC going even further, then it's a binary payload that's going over the wire. And that obviously helps us building better technology, building technology faster. And with that, breaking things apart and deploying everything as microservices actually starts to make sense. it actually starts to make sense to break things apart and give everything its bounded context. Because the whole thing about developing microservices is that a microservice has a bounded context. And with that, I essentially mean it does one thing and it does one thing very well. For example, if you look at, bless you, if you look at a Mac or a Linux operating system, or even Windows nowadays for that matter, then the command line tools that you have are amazing, amazing examples of microservices. I mean, they do literally one thing. grep literally only does grep. It doesn't do more than that because it was never designed to do more than that. So let's break up the monolith, and let's break up those monolithic services into microservices. And you know, we can probably break them down a lot more as well, but as we start to break them up, there is a problem. And as you can see on the slide behind me, the biggest problem is that everything starts talking to everything now. I mean, that's the whole idea behind a microservice architecture, that everything can essentially talk to everything. Big problem is, how do you make that into a system that that's actually scalable, that actually is understandable? Because I'm pretty sure that no one here is going to be able to follow all of the, okay, maybe in this case they are, but follow all the arrows from this one to that one, simply because it's hard to do, it's hard to read. A microservice architecture, if you don't deploy properly, is really, really difficult to grasp. So we are building applications in a different way, and we just talked about the fact that we started building out ESBs, and we started hooking all of those applications, including mainframes for that matter, started hooking everything together, and those times are changing. And as all the amazing speakers before me said, we are now building APIs. We're building evented microservices. And we're doing that to make sure that we're building an infrastructure in which all of our companies can grow, that they can undergo that digital transformation, as I heard a few times. And probably the best quote that I've heard around this comes from Forrester Research, a research firm in the US. And one of their VPs, Randy Hefner, said that exact quote down there. And if I paraphrase it a little bit, he's essentially saying that we used to have two different personas that were talking about application development and integration. So just out of curiosity, of all the developers, who would say that they're building integration? Okay, a few. Who would say that they're building apps? One, two? Okay, okay. So just out of curiosity, what are the other developers building? Anyone? Spaghettico. Spaghettico, I like that. I mean, you're Italian, so I get that you're saying spaghetti. Probably I would go for lasagna, but that's a different story. So the thing is, I fundamentally believe that those two personas are blurring together. Because when you look at integration, what is integration doing? Integration is taking data, getting that together, and then sending it to somewhere else, whether it's exposing it as an API, which is incredibly important if you want to reuse it, or whether it's just sending out events, emitting events for someone else to act on that. If you're looking at building applications, what you're essentially doing is taking data and presenting it to someone else, which is literally the same thing. What you're doing is you're taking data that exists, mapping everything together and exposing it as either an API, because someone else has to reuse that again, or maybe as a nice user interface. I mean, for example, the self-service kiosk here at Schiphol Airport, where KLM obviously did an amazing job of making that happen. But that's the same thing. Whether you're building integration or whether you're building apps, it is blurring together. So I'm wondering, is this your data center? Because as you might end up with a reasonably well-structured mesh of services and a really good established IoT environment and obviously an amazingly well-done API program, it is important that you have a landscape of servers. So whose server rack is this? Anyone? This is not KLM? Good. Just out of curiosity, does KLM use cloud? No, it isn't KLM. I tried. So as we're talking about cloud, the important thing is that, and I did like the definition of serverless. We'll definitely go into that in a bit more detail. The thing about cloud is, or the thing about servers is that you have to manage that. You have to operate that. And it's difficult. You have to deploy apps. So all of the APIs that all of us are building, you have to deploy that. You have to manage it. You have to run that. And obviously you have to patch the operating system. You have to patch the software. You have to patch, well, the entire network. And that's difficult to do. That is really tough. And you know, the first few times that you do that, that's kind of cool. But in the end, that's probably not what you want to be doing, because in the end, the developer wants to write code or, you know, create something. That is what they want to do. And I very much remember that when I started in IT, and I've been in IT for a little over 10 years now, so I haven't been there that long. But I remember that the first thing that I needed to do was install a server with BizTalk and BusinessWorks. And I remember that was actually kind of cool, because, you know, you get to get to do a bunch of stuff on the server, and that was doing important stuff. But after a few times, that got kind of boring. I mean, I was getting tired of patching all that stuff. I was getting tired of installing software upgrades. I was essentially getting tired of doing real day-to-day operations every day. I wanted to build an app, because that is what I think is fun. And I hope you guys think that is fun too. Otherwise, it's going to be a terrible presentation from now on. Good. So let's talk a bit about serverless. I mean, what is it all about? And I hope that we can, even though it's going to be difficult for the guys on YouTube, that we can sort of do it interactively. Because as I said, as a developer advocate, I get to talk to a lot of people. And the thing I love most about my job is to interact with people who use that technology, or at least trying to use that technology. So let's talk about serverless, and obviously why should you care? And looking at the quote that was on the slide by Alex, the main fundamental thing about serverless, obviously, is that you never ever manage a server. Someone else does that for you. And the ideal thing is that if someone else manages that server for you, you don't have to worry about that anymore. The only thing that you have to care about is building the best application that you can do. So if I remember correctly, there were no operations here, right? So everyone has someone else's server, because that's technically what serverless is, using someone else's server. And in the case of true serverless architectures, like for example AWS Lambda that was on the slide, is obviously using AWS's server, which is much nicer than using your own. And I know that from experience, because I actually have a server running in my office. And we'll talk about why that isn't exactly serverless, but you can still do a lot of serverless things with it. So let's break that down. What does never manage servers mean? And I think it obviously, first of all, it does start with the fact that you have no service to manage. You have no service to provision. And it all comes down to the fact that operating those servers, administering them, making sure they're all patched, they're all updated, that is a very, very difficult task. And there are only a handful of people on this planet that can do that insanely well. And those people are usually at companies like AWS, Microsoft with Azure, Google with its cloud platform, or any of the other cloud vendors that are there. They are trained daily to do that kind of stuff. They operate billions and billions of servers that exist. And for a big part, that obviously gives you the flexibility to make use of that in a very flexible way, and that gives you the ability to focus on what matters to you, getting to results faster. So the other thing is scaling with usage. You guys are part of the API operations team, right? So you manage, and I just saw an amazing Grafana dashboard, you manage how the API traffic goes. So when it scales, is that hard or is that super easy for you guys? Does it automatically scale?
In cloud, yes.
Good. Okay, in the cloud, yes. On-prem?
On-prem, we have to do it.
Exactly. You have to do it yourself. Wouldn't it be awesome if everything just scaled automatically, and then everything scales back?
Yeah.
Exactly, right? So the fundamental thing about serverless is that it scales with usage. Whether you're sending 1 billion requests a second or whether you're sending 1 request every hour, It just scales to essentially to infinity and back again, depending on the needs that you have. Obviously, as you're thinking about APIs transport very, very important data. I mean, you can obviously transport less important data too, but let's for a second say that, that you're checking in for a flight. For example, I'm flying to London tomorrow, and I want to check in. I want to be absolutely sure that when I check in, all of my data is processed properly. So I want to make sure that the systems that are going to handle my check-in and everything that's related to that, I want to be sure that they have fault tolerance built into it. I want to make sure that that high availability is built into it. So if you look at very successful cloud companies, they obviously have regions all over the world, making sure that everything is distributed to at least 2 data centers, simply because if one goes down, you want to be sure that you can handle that. That still makes sense, right? So probably the most interesting thing, at least for me, because I'm Dutch and I like free stuff, is that serverless means that you never pay for idle. And never paying for idle literally means that if my service isn't running, why should I pay for any of the underlying things that are there? Why should I pay for network? Why should I pay for the operating system? Why should I pay for the physical server that is maybe at some point in time going to run my code? Why should I pay for that? And serverless literally means that you pay by the second of what you're using. And that, to me, is one of the amazing things about serverless. And if you look at some of the success stories that have been published around the use of serverless, they all cite these 4 things for their success. They all talk about the fact that they've been able to free up their operations teams and let them join the development in order to, because they don't have to manage service anymore. They all talk about the fact that they can scale with usage, whether it's at 10 a.m. in the morning and they're processing, for example, 1 billion bank records because it has just been a payday, or whether it's just processing 1 API call. They all talk about the fact that if something goes down in one data center, the other picks it up. And they obviously all talk about the fact that they never pay for idle. Because at the end, serverless does lower your run cost, and I think that is really interesting. So does that still make sense to everyone? Good, good. So is serverless really, really that important, and is it really that interesting as Alex was talking about, as Mauricio was talking about? So I looked at a bunch of reports, and the following quotes come from a company called Serverless Inc., so it might be slightly biased, but I think it's representative for what I've been hearing in the field as well. And 53% of respondents are to their survey saying that serverless is or is becoming a critical part of their job. It's incredibly important to what they do. They literally cannot live without it. And that to me is amazing. I mean, it means that technology that's been around for, well, let's say since 2014, because that's technically when AWS started with Lambda, that in the last 4 years, more than half of the people using that technology have said, this is critical to what I do. That to me is amazing. The other thing is about 26% of those survey takers were using 2 or more cloud providers. That's interesting. Multi-cloud technology. That's pretty cool. Just out of curiosity, is anyone here using AWS? Good. Google Cloud? Good. So Azure? No Azure? Huh. Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you. Good. So multi-cloud is incredibly important. And what does that mean? I mean, if you take your code, does it run exactly the same way without changing anything on for example, Google and AWS? Maybe, exactly. So you have to change a few things. Wouldn't it be awesome if that wasn't the case anymore? Right? Exactly. And we'll get into that. So, so also kind of interesting, they looked at the top 3 languages for serverless. The number 1 and 2 are Node.js and Python, and the number 3 is Golang. Interestingly, if you look at the 2018 report from Stack Overflow, by the way, does everyone know what Stack Overflow is? No way. Good, because that is where good developers copy-paste everything from. At least I look at it. So if you look at the 2018 report from Stack Overflow, if you look at the most loved languages, the languages that people want to develop in, are exactly these 3: Node.js, Python, and Golang. With Python being the number 1, I might add. I'm guessing that is because of things like data science, but it could very well be that people just generally love Python as a development language. So, and probably the most important thing that was in that report was that 82% of all the respondents of that survey said that they used it at work, and that nearly doubled from last year. So there were 2 very important facts in there. Obviously, the first fact is that they used it at work, so that also means that a lot of people are using it for their side projects. I mean, even when I look at myself, I use a lot of serverless technology simply because of the fact that I don't have to pay when I don't use it. So I do definitely use it for my side projects. But the thing is that 82% use it at work, and that has nearly doubled since 2017. So there is an amazing growth in serverless technology. And by the way, and we'll sort of talk about that in a bunch of the slides going forward, serverless and things like function as a service are not the same thing. I mean, when you, by the way, can anyone give me a good definition of what function as a service would be? Okay, a bad definition? Any definition? Guys, come on. Okay, so I'll try. So if you look at serverless, I mean, that basically is what I just talked about. It means that it can scale, that you don't have to manage any servers. It means that you don't have to pay for idle, and it means that you have high availability and fault tolerance built in. The thing is that applies to a lot of things. It applies to things like Salesforce. It applies to things like Dropbox. I mean, if you want to share that file, you're only paying for the plan that you have. Function as a service is a part of that. It's the part that runs the code whenever you want to. So I know that a lot of people are using those 2 things interchangeably, but technically you shouldn't be doing that. Serverless and fast are not the exact same thing. Now I totally realize that as I'll go forward into the slides, you'll see a lot of the word serverless. And when I talk about that serverless, I actually talk about just that, serverless. So the other thing is, did someone say containers? I mean, who's looked at Docker before? Who knows what it is? Good. So what is the icon of Docker? A wheel, thank you. I'm just checking if everyone's still awake and if everyone's really being honest with me here. I mean, containers are awesome. Containers allow you to package everything up into a single, let's go with Docker for a second, into a single Docker image, distribute that Docker image to where it has to run, and it also allows you to very easily scale your apps. It allows you to very easily take all of the dependencies that you have on whatever it is, whether it's a database or an operating system or a specific version of Node.js or Golang, and deploy that to somewhere where you can run it, whether that's your own hardware or cloud. And if you follow the big cloud providers over the past year, then you've seen that a lot of them have added container or sort of serverless containerized support into their platforms. For example, AWS Fargate. Has anyone used Fargate already? Oh, good. That's good to hear. Fargate is amazingly interesting. I mean, it has the same fundamental principles as, for example, Lambda, but it allows you to run a Docker container that way. In fact, the Google team went one step further, and during their Google Cloud Next, they talked about the fact that you can take a Docker container and run it inside of Google Cloud Functions. Docker containers as function as a service. That's pretty awesome. That means that you can literally take any language, literally take any application that you want, assuming that it's sort of 12-factor compliant, and run that as a function. That is awesome. That is awesome technology that we never had before. And it obviously means that we have to change the way about how we think. So let's go one level deeper. Let's actually sort of unpack that box and look at how we can go from that mess of microservices into something that maybe makes a little bit more sense, that maybe is a little bit easier to stomach for all of us. And the idea behind serverless is obviously that you reuse common building blocks like storage, like API gateways, like email services, all that kind of stuff. And let's focus on function as a service, because that sort of is the glue that ties everything together. So as you look one level deeper, and I just used the Amazon icons here on this slide. Obviously, I could have replaced that with Azure, or Google Cloud, or any of the others that exist. It helps clean up my architecture, because I can now use standard building blocks for API gateways, for message queuing, for data storage. All of that stuff I can use out of the box without having to worry about what I as a developer have to do, or what I as an operations person have to do. And if you look at a function app, what is in there? What fundamentally builds a function as a service application? And essentially, there are three things that build that. At the far right, you have the event source, and event source literally is just that. I mean, it's an event coming in. Whether it is someone calling an API, whether it's someone putting a file on a file share, whether it's someone sending you a message. It is just an event. And obviously, the way that you process an event is the same, whether it's a billion events or just one. I mean, the way that you interact with those events is going to be different. Now, we're going to have functions, and function is the actual thing that does something. It's the method that you write in, for example, languages like Java, Node.js, .NET, or Golang. And it talks to a bunch of services, because in the end, it has to do something. Otherwise, it would be a relatively meaningless function as a service. Right? Good. So that is what a function is all about. It's a relatively easy concept, and the whole idea why it's an easy concept is because it's a small thing. And I believe that is exactly where Flogo fits in. I mean, you can easily take Flogo into these small circles and then run it as what I would call serverless integration. So I've talked about Flogo briefly for the last 10 seconds, but does anyone know what Flogo is? Yeah, I would hope so. And yeah, who's that serverless integration? Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Good. You're right. But does anyone know a bit more details about what Flogo is?
I saw the interface.
Okay.
And you have building blocks to
Okay.
change stuff on microservices, or make a microservice out of an API or whatever.
Okay, that's good. I like it.
You make the events and trigger and take an action for that.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely correct. So building microservices and essentially using triggers and activities to come up with that, absolutely true. Does anyone know where Flogo came from? Mauricio, I would certainly hope that you would raise your hand now. Exactly, but when did we release it?
What is now? Couple of years?
Exactly. So 2 years ago at TIBCO now in Las Vegas, it was 2016. Our VP of product, Rajiv Kurikatutodi, went on stage and talked about a moonshot project that we had, hence the moon behind me. He talked about the fact that our industry is changing. He talked about the fact that people are using smaller and smaller devices, and that is obviously where the IoT angle comes from. He talked about the fact that people that are building apps are changing. I mean, we all grew up in a world where we thought that writing code is a bad thing, but it turns out it is not. In fact, I love writing code, and I'm okay with that. I love opening up my Visual Studio Code and just writing Golang. And we'll talk about that in a second too. So in 2016, we launched Project Flogo as an IoT integration platform, and ever since it's grown not just in capabilities that what it can do, but it also grew in adoption by the open source community. For everyone that's wondering, the incredibly cute hummingbird with a jetpack strapped to his back is called Flynn. And Flynn is the mascot. So you'll see Flynn coming by in a few different shapes and sizes throughout the presentation. By the way, for everyone that's already downloaded the Docker image for the Flogo web UI, there is an amazing Easter egg with Flynn in there. And we'll talk about that during the breakout session. So developers and the way that we build apps is changing. And if you look at open source, because Flogo is built as an open source project, the reason that we did that as open source is fundamentally because we believe that working together with the open source community is going to drive innovation. It's going to allow us to innovate faster and build amazing products that you can make use of. It's going to help you innovate faster because you can use the innovation not only that's coming from us, but also that's coming from the open source community. And when you look at it, 91% of developers use the same open source tools for work as well as personal projects. And yes, in my case, that is true. I use Flogo for personal projects as well. In fact, I was doing a session with one of our partners the other day about their use of Flogo, and that guy was telling me that he doesn't just use Flogo in the office where he builds the technology that the partner sells. He's using Flogo at home as well. He has a smart doorbell that he has embedded Flogo in, where that doorbell looks at who is in front of it, and Flogo then decides whether to open the door or not. I mean, how amazing is that? It's also kind of scary, but to me, it was also pretty amazing. So as we had a bunch of developers here, I'm just curious, are you guys using the same tools at home as you're doing here? I see one, yes, that's good. So what kind of tools?
I have smart devices, and I played out a bit with IoT.
Nice.
With motion sensors.
Nice.
And Arduino.
Arduino, oh, awesome.
But not far than that.
Okay, no, but that's cool.
Home and smart thermostats and smart lights.
Nice, I like it, I like it. So you've been watching the Google announcements over the past week with all the new stuff that they announced?
Not yet.
Okay. Oh, you should totally do that. That's awesome. That's going to be awesome. You said yes as well?
Yep.
Can I ask what you're using?
I'm boring. I'm not IoT related.
That's okay.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's not boring. That's that's still doing cool stuff.
I'm developing the same web applications that I do at work. I do
Awesome.
At home.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I mean, I write microservices at home as well, so that's not boring. That is cool.
Using the same technology.
Awesome. So Node.js, Java.
No, Java, GraphQL.
GraphQL.
Yeah.
How can that be boring? That's insanely cool technology.
Yeah, but it's the same as at home.
Okay.
As it works.
Okay. No, but I mean, I would definitely not classify that as boring. Trust me on that one. Okay, so the other thing is that 98% of all developers, of everyone here, is using open source technology. So I also fundamentally think that either 2% lied or just don't know that they're using open source technology. Because how can you not? Who here thinks that they're not using open source technology? Okay, good. So what kind of open source technology are you guys using?
Node.js.
Node.js, absolutely, yes, love it. That's a great example. Any others? Apart from the Arduino and... Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, you're using Ubuntu. Makes perfect sense. Exactly. A lot of the stuff that we're using today has been built as open source, whether it's a programming language like Node.js or Golang, whether it is a database or an operating system like Ubuntu, FreeBSD, that kind of stuff. A lot of amazing technology that we are using on a day-to-day basis has been built as open source. And there is a reason for that. The exact same reason as why we built our technology as open source, because we believe in that innovation of the open source community. And if you look at commercial applications of open source, 96% of all companies use open source as a key part of the technology that they sell. And yes, that includes TIBCO too. So let's talk a bit about Project Flogo. Let's talk about what Flogo is, what it does, and obviously talk about the amazingly cute hummingbird that is there. And if you look at it, there are 5 main values, if you will, that make up Flogo, and those are the 5 that are down below here. It all starts with the fact that Flogo is, I'll go stand at this other side, I guess. That's better for pictures. Flogo is 10 to 50 times lighter than any Node.js, Java, or .NET application. And that is incredibly important as you think about the never paying for idle part. Because in that case, all of a sudden, the size of your app starts to matter. The smaller it is, the less you pay, because you pay for the resources that you're using. It is 100% open source, and it is our stack to build event-driven applications. So if you think back to that slide where I was talking about how apps that we're building are changing, and that we're now building much more API and event-driven apps, that is exactly what Project Flogo is designed to do. It is building that type of apps. I'm going to skip the hummingbird in the middle for a sec. It allows you to deploy your applications as serverless or on function as a service. It allows you to deploy as containers on IoT devices and essentially anywhere you want to without changing your code. And that is the fundamental importance about something like Project Flogo. And then obviously it comes with a bunch of cool things embedded into it. One of them being machine learning. I'm not saying that we're replacing TensorFlow or anything. I mean, far from that. We're actually using TensorFlow. So if you have trained TensorFlow models, for example, using something like AWS SageMaker to train it, then you can run those models. You can run an inferencing agent in Flogo to use that model to determine what's going on. For the people that have seen either the last TIBCO now in Las Vegas or the one before that, for example, in Berlin or San Diego for that matter, we talked a lot about what that machine learning capability does. In Las Vegas last year, I was talking about the fact that we had a box with a Raspberry Pi in there with a bunch of sensors and a machine learning model that determined what was happening to that box. Whether it was put down for an X amount of seconds, whether someone was walking with it, and whether someone was throwing that box through the air. Because that is important to know. Those are events that you want to know. So coming back to that hummingbird in the middle, where it says Common Core, when we started off Project Flogo, it definitely was just an IoT project. But as I said, over the past 2 years, it has grown immensely to not just do that, but it's now much more a general stack to build event-driven apps. So it's grown up quite a bit, and we decided to split everything nicely into subsegments, one of them being the Flogo Core. So Flogo Core really is an event-driven core that all of the others can reuse. So I talked about how small, and I realized that black on blue was not the best choice in colors here. But a typical Java application right here comes in at around 180 megabytes in footprint. A typical Node.js application does about 74 megabytes in memory. And a typical Flogo app takes about 10 megabytes. And that is amazing. I mean, that small memory footprint means that you can run it on an IoT device. Means that you can put it on a smart thermostat, on a doorbell, on a belt loader, I hope, tomorrow. And as I talked about the capabilities that the Common Core of Project Flogo has, obviously I wanted to talk about those. And wow, that was fast. That was way faster than I had intended to. Good. So when we started off TIBCO now in Las Vegas, we essentially had 2 capabilities for Project Flogo. We had the integration flows with the cool web UI that I already saw some people playing with, and we had the micro gateway, also known as Mashlink. And as you look at it, that was built. That was used to build integration flows and deploy them on devices or as serverless functions. And the micro gateway obviously was to design micro gateway actions and front APIs and build API proxies with it. But time hasn't stood still, and we realized we needed to build a bunch of additional applications as well. So we started out building stream processing because events can occur in much more than just one-offs. I mean, sending one API call is an event, absolutely true, but there's also a use case for streaming data, whether it's a stream of sensor data, whether it's a stream of, for example, Kafka messages. At some point, you have to realize you might be processing streams. So that is a first-class capability of Project Flogo now. The other thing that we've added is contextual rules, the ability to apply declarative rules on your events as they come in. Has anyone ever heard about a TIBCO product called Business Events? Good, a few, yes. I would be very worried if the TIBCO people said no here. But Business Events is essentially a ready engine that's used to create an index of the rules and apply all those rules on the events coming in. And that team set out to build the exact same thing, but in Golang, in a smart enough runtime so that you can actually take that, embed it into your Flogo app, run it inside of the same application as you would do with your integration flows or your streams, and then deploy that to wherever it is that you want to. So I talked a bit about how awesome the open source community is, and I just took a few measures here. And if you look at it right now, and this is an older screenshot because when I looked at it this morning, the number was a bit higher. Flogo is the most popular open source integration project on GitHub when you look at the number of stars. That to me is amazing. I mean, we started 2 years ago. And if you look at this blue line, it's increasing exponentially, and that is amazing. I mean, if you look at it, we have over 100 contributors to our open source project, even more users. But these are people that have built triggers, that have built activities, that have built extensions to the core framework of what Project Flogo is. And obviously, they are not just TIBCO people. I mean, there are a lot of people that are just out in the open source community that want to contribute to something like this.
What is in red and in green? I cannot read it.
Red is MuleSoft, the green is JBoss Fuse. So that one's here. Just saying. It might be, but it's still commonly used. No, red was not in this slide. So the other thing is that as of today, and to be fair, I haven't looked at the exact number today, but we have more than 450 contributions that people build, more than 450 activities and triggers that people have built that you can use in your web UI. And that is an amazing number. That means that innovation really isn't just coming from TIBCO. It's actually coming from the entire world. I mean, it's coming from people that I have never seen. It's coming from countries that I have never been to. I probably should go visit them, though, simply because I would like to talk to them. And if you look at it, then there are a bunch of ways how you can build your applications. And probably what most people have seen so far is the web UI, and that's obviously something that we'll look at a bit further. But there is a zero-code web UI that allows you to almost drag and drop the activities on a canvas, and with that create an integration flow and then build it from there and deploy it so that it's a Docker container and it's available on Docker Hub. So that Docker container gives you everything that you need to get started with Project Flogo. No need to install anything except for Docker, which is pretty cool. But as I talked about, there are a lot of different people that want to interact with Flogo. So there are a bunch of different ways how you can build your app. one of the things that we've added is a Golang API. So if you're comfortable with Go, and you want to write your own code like I do, in that case you can just use Flogo as a Go library, as a Go lib that you go get and then use in your own Go code. By the way, who uses Go to write programs? Really? We have only one Go developer? Huh. Used to be a lot more than that. And if those two are none of your liking, then we also have a third option. We have the ability to declare everything using an elegant JSON model. And the cool thing is, if you look at all of those things, they pretty much produce the same result. In fact, if you look at what the Flogo App UI does, if you were to go in there, export your app, it's exactly this JSON model. It literally is the same thing. So if you take this JSON model and import it back again, you'll see the same result. So I've talked about a bunch of things. I've talked about the Flogo core, and for us, Flogo core is the center of the universe, if you will. It's the nucleus of the atom for Flogo. It's our event-driven app kernel for serverless and IoT integration. And the reason I keep talking about the fact that it's event-driven is because Flogo, at its core, is an event-driven framework. It's a framework that is based on the fact that you're going to have triggers and you're going to have actions. Triggers that receive data from somewhere, actions that are being carried out based on the type of event you're getting. So there is an internal channel there so that you can combine all of the capabilities that I talked about in one single binary. Because it would be terrible if you would have an IoT device with an integration app, with a streaming app, with a rules app that all have to work together. So you probably need to have some form of messaging on there as well. In that case, you're deploying 4 apps onto an IoT device. That's going to be a terrible experience. That's going to be very difficult to maintain. So when we set out to build all of those different capabilities, the most important thing for us was to make sure that everything could be done in that same application, so one single binary. Obviously, that common contribution model that I talked about means that all of those triggers, all of those 450 extensions that exist can be used with all of those capabilities, whether you're designing a micro gateway or whether you're building an integration flow or whether you're using a streaming app. They can all use the same activities. They can all use the same triggers that have been built. And yes, if you really want to, there is a simple interface to extend all of those capabilities as well. So I talked a bit about triggers, handlers, actions, and as we talk about how a Flogo app works and why it's so unique, I did want to spend a few seconds just talking about the general model. I mean, you have a bunch of events coming in, and events are received by triggers. So triggers essentially receive the events from external data sources, whether that is a Kafka topic, whether that's a database, whether that's a sensor. It's all coming in, and it's obviously managed by an incredibly configurable threading model, and it has a common interface so that anyone can build a Flogo trigger. You just have to know a bit of Golang, and as long as you follow the common model, you'll be able to build a Flogo trigger. Handlers essentially dispatch the events that are coming into the respective action that should be taken, and the action is, those are the capabilities that I talked about. So those are the integration flows, the micro gateways, the streaming apps, and the contextual rules. And as I just talked about, you want to do everything in a single app. So you want to be able to chain everything together. I mean, if you look at for example, the belt loader, when I think about how that might work, and I'm not saying that I've tried, I'm just sort of theorizing here, you're going to get a stream of data because all of those luggage suitcases and things like that is being tagged with an RFID, and that's just a stream coming in. And you might want to aggregate a bunch of things. You might want to filter out the ones that you don't need. And based on that, you want to do some rules. Should it go directly to another plane? Should it go to the internal hangars to store? And probably you want to do some form of integration. You want to maybe not write it to a log, but you probably want to send a message saying, hey, this piece of luggage for Mr. Canton has been put into the hangar because his flight isn't departing for another 5 hours. Or, hey, this piece of luggage for Mr. Stigter is going directly to the airport because he has a connecting flight. So everything done in one single application model, and that is really important. And that is what we call action chaining. Good. So we talked a bit about going from monoliths to microservice and to serverless. We talked a bit about what is serverless and why do I care. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is when, where, and why use serverless. But I think that before we should do that, let's take a break. Quick break on. Good. So I'll see you back in.
Yeah, let's take a 15-minute break.
15-minute break.
Alex, shall we stop the... Maybe not the most useful thing for when you do.
Well, you never know. Maybe.
Someone wants to
Sometimes
undertake
it's nice. It's not good to be, taped if you're not...
Now we have a karaoke.
Good. So then as soon as at least Mauricio sits down, we'll continue. I mean, it's a lot easier to talk to Mauricio than to one of our gracious hosts. So thank you all for returning. I mean, that was interesting. By the way, I'm terribly excited that I'm now a KLM pioneer. If I need to return it, then just let me know. I'll put it back in the jar. But I mean, I think it's kind of cool. And I actually think you guys are doing pretty awesome stuff with technology to begin with. So before the break, we talked a bit about monoliths, microservices, functions. We talked a bit about serverless and why you should care. So now let's talk a bit about the practical examples of serverless. I mean, why would you use it? And I think that if you use serverless, it is all about making life a bit easier. I mean, even if it's just a little bit, making life easier is really important. And even if it's just making my life a bit easier. One of the things that I fundamentally believe at as a developer advocate is use the technology that you're advocating for. So I built a ton of microservices and a ton of functions that run on AWS Lambda that I built with Flogo. And for me, it does a whole bunch of things. I mean, as we just talked about using technology, the same technology you do at home as you do for work, that's what I do as well. I mean, to create that graph and get all these statistics about contributors, number of extensions, I use a ton of Flogo apps running on AWS Lambda. And the reason I'm telling that is because all of them are open source, so you can absolutely go to my GitHub account and check how that works. And I think that it's incredibly important because it makes my life easier. Because I get to focus on what I really like to do. I mean, I don't really like to scour GitHub for all the amazing stuff that exists out there. I mean, that's what we have computers for. They do that better than we can, right? Good. So in my case, it makes my life a lot easier, and I get to focus on talking to developers, making sure that you can do cool things with it. One of the other things, and I just took a TIBCO example of one of the things that we just launched. It's called TIBCO Cloud Integration for Salesforce, and you can totally forget about that name, or not. If you want to buy it, then there's the account exec. Yes, Rob, I was talking to you. Good. You're making notes. Good. So one of those products that we launched as a native UI sitting in Salesforce in Salesforce's Lightning platform, and it's meant to send data to Marketo. And why is that important? Because obviously Salesforce has a pretty good interaction with Marketo out of the box. So why did we build something there? Because we fundamentally believe that with the serverless technology that Flogo also represents, and with a bit of machine learning, so I'm going to talk about those two together, we could build a unique experience. And I'm hoping that as I talk about what we did, that it will sort of trigger you on some of the use cases, some of how you can apply serverless together with things like machine learning for KLM, or even for yourself, or for other companies, obviously. So what we did is we wanted to make it easy for non-developers, so people that really live inside Salesforce, like marketing people or Salesforce admins, to be able to integrate systems together, to connect stuff together. And the way that we did that is that we have a UI here that automatically recognizes where you want to send that data. So if you say that, hey, I want to send it to Marketo, then it obviously looks at what are going to be the Marketo endpoints. By the way, for those of you who don't know what Marketo is, it's essentially a marketing automation tool. So as it does that, it realizes that you have two separate schemas, if you will. You have one on the Salesforce side, you have one on the Marketo side. It's a traditional integration problem. I mean, all of us together have been solving that kind of challenge for the past 20, 30 years. I mean, probably even longer, but I just don't know that. Now, what we want to do is make that easier. And the way to make that easier is help you with that mapping. Because as a Salesforce expert, I mean, the name kind of implies that. You know Salesforce. You know exactly what it is, what it does. Salesforce expert also probably means that you're not an integration expert. So how can we help you create that mapping? Well, the good part is that if you look at the schema on this side and the schema on this side, there are going to be things that are relatively similar. So you can train a machine learning model to look at both sides and suggest the mapping for you. So you can say that if you have first name on one side and F name or L name on the other side, that one of those two should probably match. Based on a machine learning algorithm that one of my colleagues created, it looks at both sides and calculates what the odds are that those two should match up. If it's above, I think we said 80%, then we will automatically map it for you. You can obviously change the mapping, and if it's below a certain threshold, then we'll not show you any matches. You can obviously select whichever field that you wanted to, and based on what you select, the model will obviously be trained, and in that case, it will become smarter. But the whole thing is that as you're using machine learning to do that, ultimately, you don't have to be worried about that mapping anymore. So you can really focus on the business logic. Now, why we're using serverless obviously has to do with cost, because it's incredibly costly to run that type of model for 24/7. Because this integration isn't running 24/7. It runs whenever a record is added or whenever a record is updated. In case of Salesforce. If you look at, for example, a booking system, then it's going to run as soon as you do a booking or update your advanced passenger information, which surprisingly is also called API, which was, funny to me. So as you're doing all of that, the reason behind serverless is that it's going to save you cost and obviously skill with usage. I was talking to one of the KLM guys over the break. About how does that actually scale? How does that work? And the cool part is that AWS, in this case AWS, takes care of that for you. You don't have to worry about that. I mean, AWS automatically realizes that as your load increases, that they should scale the number of containers that run your app. And that is incredibly useful because you as a developer, you know how your application should react. You don't have to be worried about how the network's going to act, how you have to instrument your load balancer, how you have to handle the resources underneath. That's done for you. And that is one of the amazing things behind serverless. So talking about some of the use cases that people have used serverless for, and I've talked about a bunch of them already, then it all starts with APIs. I mean, one of the most common reasons that people use serverless technologies is building backend APIs. So literally the thing that all of us are building to exchange information, and the whole reason why serverless is so important is because of building backend APIs or front-end APIs, depending on where in the stack you are, obviously. Data processing is incredibly important because with the increasing volume of today's data, someone has to take care of processing all of that. So why not let it be done by something that can actually scale to that amount of data? Integrating systems, I mean, that's a traditional use case that, for example, companies like TIBCO do. And that is increasingly being done with serverless technology. So it also shouldn't be a surprise that something like Flogo runs natively on AWS Lambda, simply because we see that you want to take whatever compute resource you want to choose and run your integration there. You shouldn't be listening to a vendor that says, hey, you really need to have hardware XYZ simply because that has more cores and that might perform better. No, you need to be able to run it wherever you want to run it. As a developer, you want to choose the right tool for the job, so why not choose the right compute platform for the job? That still makes sense, right? Good. So 3 other very common use cases are building internal tools. I mean, I cannot count the number of internal tools that we at TIBCO have built using serverless technology. One of the cool things that our cloud ops team has built is a provisioning tool for AWS accounts. I mean, most of the people at TIBCO have an AWS account, and with all the rules and regulations that exist within a company, it nearly took 2 days to set everything up according to the specification of our security architects. And obviously, because security is that important, you don't want to give out an account to someone and then later on say, oh, that was a production account and we kind of have a breach now. That is probably the worst thing that can happen. Probably. So we set up a bunch of serverless functions, so on AWS Lambda, to build out that provisioning platform. So the only thing that our cloud ops has to do is say, this is the email address of the person at TIBCO that needs to have an account. Go provision it. It automatically looks up all the additional data that it needs, for example, who he's reporting to, what the cost center is, that kind of stuff. It goes out to AWS, creates the account, and comes back, sets all the correct rules, all the correct parameters, all that kind of cool stuff. And it does that without ever involving a human person, simply because that isn't needed anymore. Because all of those serverless functions talk together in an evented way. It's also done in an evented way, as I just said, simply because you don't know how long that call is going to take. It could take 20 seconds if AWS isn't processing a lot of traffic. It could take 2 minutes if they're super busy. So depending on that, you don't want to be or your service shouldn't be the bottleneck. So that is why evented APIs are that important. And we'll talk about what evented APIs are during some of the breakout sessions, because I fundamentally believe that evented APIs are going to be the APIs of the future. By the way, that does not mean that REST or HTTP is going away. Let me be very clear on that. I absolutely think that REST and HTTP as a protocol are incredibly important to building evented APIs. Something like chatbots. Does KLM have a chatbot? Okay. Sorry? Several. Okay. I actually knew. I only knew about one, and I only knew that because I was reading on that yesterday, which is actually super awesome. I mean, that is awesome technology. Building a chatbot is one of the predominant use cases of serverless, simply because it allows you to interact with data as well as with the device doing something, without having to ever spin up an entire server to do so. And obviously IoT apps, and we'll talk a lot about that tomorrow during some of the sessions there. But IoT is one of the predominant use cases of why people are looking at serverless. One of the big reasons about serverless, as I talked about, is money. And I have 2 slides coming up that really talk about how using serverless has transformed companies in terms of monetization. So the first I wanted to talk about is just about the technology that I'm talking about, Project Flogo. When we ran Project Flogo on AWS Lambda, we did 1.5 million requests to Lambda for just 10 cents. 1.5 million requests. So a request and a response, obviously, for 10 cents. Can you imagine if I had $10, how much I could do on AWS? That is amazing. Can you imagine if you took the amount of money that you're spending on hardware every day or every month or every year, use that on serverless technology? Wouldn't that be awesome what you could do there? Obviously, you should still spend money on hardware. I'm not saying that move everything to serverless. The other one I wanted to talk about is a company called a Cloud Guru. Has anyone heard of that company? Okay, good, nice, good, awesome. Have you used it? Or?
Using it.
Really? Oh, that's cool. That's cool. So I was at Serverless Conf, which is one of the conferences that they sponsor, and I was in the one in San Francisco. Have you been to any of them?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Oh, you really should. They're awesome. And the founders of a Serverless Conf were talking about, the founders of a Cloud Guru were talking about how they have used serverless technology in order to literally build their company. Those guys started off, or actually one of them started off building a traditional services and tried running that on Amazon, on EC2, and quickly realized that was going to be insanely expensive. So he wanted to do something else, and he obviously looked at, for example, Lambda. And as one of the more successful companies that is using serverless, they're doing 6.5 million requests a day. And in their case, a request isn't just an API call transferring a small JSON payload. In their case, a request could also be transferring a gigabyte worth of video. Because what they do is they provide training courses for cloud resources, as sort of the name implies. And every month, they spend about $580 on all of their Lambda infrastructure. And that is amazing. I mean, can you imagine if you could do 6.5 million requests per day, how many requests per month or per year that is? And how much you would have to spend in traditional hardware to support that? That's going to be huge. So just spending $580 to support that, to me, is amazing. So as we come to the end of this presentation, we talked about going from monoliths to microservices and to functions, and why, at least in most companies that I talk to, I still see all of those, and I fundamentally believe I'll see all of those at least until the point that I'm going to retire, which is not for a long shot, by the way. We talked about what is serverless and why should you care? What is it all about? And we talked about when, where, why use serverless. I mean, it isn't a silver bullet. It isn't going to solve world hunger, but it is going to make your life easier as a developer, or at least it made my life easier. So I'm hoping it's going to make your life easier too. And we obviously talked about Project Flogo and how that fits into to serverless and function as a service. So with that, I really wanted to thank all of you for the 1.5 hours or so that you've been listening to me. And I realize it's been a long morning and an early morning for some people flying in today. So if you have any questions, I think that Alex had a Q&A slot in the agenda somewhere.
Yes, this is actually the moment.
Oh, good. So this is the Q&A slot in the agenda.
Yeah.
And if not, I'm going to be around all day today, tomorrow, and if you have any questions, I totally forgot to put my Twitter handle on here. But if you have any questions, just tweet me at Leon Stigter, and I'll reply to that as well.
Great. So, guys, that was awesome presentation. Thank you very much. Let's give Leon a well-deserved round of applause. Yeah. I'm going to start Q&A session because I have some questions prepared.
Sure.
But tell us, is Flogo used in the airline industry by other clients of yours?
So there are a lot of people looking at Flogo and implementing that in their solutions. I would have to check whether or not they're airlines, but there are a lot of companies doing it today. If you want me to give one example,
yes.
It's going to be the same example that you've heard in Las Vegas, a company called Jabil. By the way, who knows what Jabil is? Jabil. Good, in that case I'm not alone. I mean, up until TIBCO now, I had no clue what they did, but they are a contract manufacturer that have about 170,000 employees. They do $20 billion worth in revenue every year. So it's by no means a small company, and they work for, as a contract manufacturer for companies like ABB, Whirlpool. I'm guessing those are much more familiar to you, right? Exactly. So they started looking at Flogo to embed into devices, which obviously more an IoT use case, simply because they can use that data either to monetize on that or to simply make that experience for their customer better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is interesting. Well,
We have also a logistic company in the Asia Pac that use Flogo on containers on the ship to monitor.
So an actual shipping container, not a Docker container, but
Not a Docker. It's
just saying.
Shipping container. Contain goods.
Yeah, a physical container.
A big container. So they monitor the container, where they are, the content of the container.
so my next question is kind of directly stems from this. So we're
Sure.
obviously airlines, and
Yes.
airlines are risk averse.
Yes.
So far from, to the best of your knowledge, what is the criticality of the use cases that people have actually employed Flogo for in production?
Mission critical.
Mission critical. Oh,
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at what people do,
Yeah.
then as I said in the presentation, people are using Flogo or using open source in general to power their mission critical systems. And I fundamentally believe that every company should look at open source. I mean, you're going to have licenses because you want to have support, and I think that having a supported product is really important. But I also believe that you should look at open source first. And as companies are doing that, they realize that using open source technology to power mission critical systems is absolutely okay.
Yeah, definitely. So what I wanted to hear is whether or not there are other companies who have already deployed Flogo for their mission critical flows. And perhaps my first question before I start back and let the public shoot. Well, if you're providing support, there must be cases that come to the support. It's a bit cheeky question I'm going to ask. So what was the biggest Flogo failure so far?
That's an interesting one. So that's a tough one to answer. I'll tell you the funniest that I've ever seen.
Okay.
And the reason I can easily talk about that is simply because it was in our community, and we fundamentally believe in the power of our community. So we told everyone that if you have questions, don't email us internally. So even TIBCO people, we tried to pull them into the community, and all of a sudden we had a person joining that went by the name of Matt Quinn. For the TIBCO folks in the audience, they'll probably recognize him as our COO. He started using Flogo to build out his thesis project that he did a long time ago in university. And he was trying to use Flogo using the Golang API, and it didn't work.
Wow.
Yes.
And what do we learn from it?
Exactly. So that was kind of challenging. Because obviously you don't want to disappoint your COO, and that was tough. So we ultimately tracked it down to a small issue in one of our triggers, so it was easily fixable. But the cool part of that was it was fixed by our community simply because our COO was in there asking that question. So it's not just people in the community asking questions, actually TIBCO people being there as well.
Okay, that's a very interesting experience. Guys, so that was my three questions to our presenter. Now it's your turn.
I have a question
Yes.
Alex asked where did it really use the Flogo to airline industry or not, but my more focus on the integration and where the API management come into the picture. So not related to airline domain, but did you see any use cases and where the Flogo is used as part of API management 3 in that pipeline?
Yes.
Integration and
Absolutely. So the fundamental use case behind Project Flogo is going to be integration. And I talked a lot about serverless integration today because that was sort of the topic of today. But if you look at how people are using Project Flogo, I would say that at least half of those people that are using Flogo are deploying it as containers on whatever infrastructure that they choose. And for them, it really is the microservice that either exposes an API or an event that then they try to hook up to something like Mashery. So even if you look at what we're doing internally, a lot of our teams are looking at how to use Flogo and either build a capability around that or embed that into what they're doing. For example, the Mashery team has created or is working on or created the first version of Mashling, and that was the standalone micro gateway, if you will. And that is now being pulled into the Flogo ecosystem simply because it makes sense to be in that ecosystem. So over the coming time, you'll see that that Mashling gateway will much more morph into an action or a capability, if you will, of the Flogo ecosystem, so that you can have everything in one application. So yes, I definitely see a lot of people using it as their integration tool. More and more, and using that together with API management.
Yeah, so if you look at the open, at the vastity of different services that you have, so you go from on-premise, cloud, private cloud, IoT, microservice. So the future of the API is more like a federated type of API management. So you will see more and more the microservice with the micro gateway, so you can deploy it in serverless technology, and then maybe connected to a more API management type of platform. So more than now is more like you have a gateway and everything goes to the gateway, and then you go to your service. Instead, you will have more a federated type of gateway and micro gateway.
Does that answer your question? Yep. Good.
If we have to use the Flogo, should we have to Go?
That depends. I always hate to use "it depends" as the starting point to an answer, but in this case it really does. So let me find the exactly. So. As I was talking about, there are three ways to build Flogo apps. You can absolutely use Go. I mean, if that's your thing, totally awesome. If you want to write JSON to do it, totally awesome. If you don't want to do any of those, then use the UI. And in that case, you don't have to learn any Go. I mean, it's nice if you do, so that you can build your own activities if you wanted to. But I mean, if you're comfortable with using a web UI, go for it. So the answer, you don't have to, but if you want to, yes.
Is any one of them more easier than the other, or do we miss any feature if we skip one of them?
No. So no, the whole idea behind giving different models of using Flogo is that it should be exactly the same. So in fact, when you design your app using the web UI and you say export it, then it actually gives you a JSON file, which is exactly this thing. If you import a JSON file back into the web UI, it's going to be exactly the same thing. I mean, all of the triggers and activities you can use in Go. The added bonus of using it as just a Go library is that you can mix in any of your existing Go code. So if you're a Go developer and you write Go code, then this is probably the thing you're going to choose, simply because you can mix in the stuff that you already have.
And you can also extend if you use to create extension and new triggers
Yes.
and new activity using Go. It's extensible on that.
Somebody who has no clue how Go would work, the first option would be go to the web UI.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that is, I would say, how 90% of people I've interacted with have started. They started downloading it from Flogo.io or Docker Hub, download the web UI, play around with it, create a bunch of microservices, run them wherever they want, and then look at how that JSON sort of works, try to modify a few things there. And if they're comfortable with it, then look at how you would do something in Golang. If you want to, I can bring it up. No, I know, but we were going to do that this afternoon.
Yeah, we're gonna do
Or at least I hope.
Yeah, this afternoon, guys.
Okay.
Just a reminder, we have ideas for lightning hacks. That's, so we already have some, well, kind of scribbled. So the idea is that after the lunch break, it's important, after the lunch break, not before, we're going to ask Leon to do very quick kind of demonstrations, how it could be done. So
Okay.
more kind of to build the bridge from these nice presentations to some real
I like it.
code. Yeah?
Oh, these are awesome. There are some very cool use cases here.
Okay, so
I like it.
something. Okay, Abin, shoot.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I understand that Flogo is mostly designed for microservices,
Yes.
but how does it fit into a bigger environment? I mean, normally microservices expand as we move along, or more features come in.
Yes.
So how does it fit in?
So, I mean, I think first of all, as a developer, you have to, as I said, you have to choose the right tool for the job. And I think that if you want to build a microservice, then I would say Flogo is the right tool for the job. And I realize that no company is ever going to go with one thing to solve all problems. So when we started off building Project Flogo, we obviously looked at all the technology that we had within TIBCO with products like BusinessWorks, like Mastery for API management. So when we started building it, we really wanted to make sure that that as you build your microservice and you deploy it, that you can use it with any of the other things that exist. And if you build a microservice and want to extend it later, the good part is you can just go into the web UI or use any of those options and simply add a flow in there. And you have a second version of your microservice.
So it is compatible, or?
Yes.
Is Flogo supporting the API design first approach? Like I start with designing the API and then I can go ahead and implement it within the Flogo?
Yes, I mean if you go to TIBCO Cloud Integration, and Flogo is an integral part of that, you can design your API spec first, and then there is a right-click, I think it was, that says create a Flogo app from this. The same way that you would generate a Node.js app from it or a mock application in TCI. So yes. Good questions, by the way.
What is the typical startup time for this? Because you're talking about not advocating about serverless, but of course, obviously, serverless has certain disadvantages.
Yes.
Like, I don't know what is the startup time for the Go, if maybe comparison to the Node.js and the Python, the first one, right? And my other question is like, you mentioned that these cloud gurus, they are doing everything by serverless. I believe sometimes it's really complex because these long running processes, they are really not good fit for the serverless. So how do you like break it down to the smaller pieces? I probably know a little bit the answer, but it is giving you.
Sure. So starting with the startup times first, there are a bunch of amazing blogs about the difference in startup times between them, and I think that Go was one of the fastest. Also, when you look at some recurring tasks like recursion and that kind of thing, Go pretty much outperformed all of the others, which is an added benefit, especially when you're running on things like serverless. Coming back to the second part of your question, yeah, not everything is going to be a serverless use case, and I think that if you look at least what a cloud guru did in order to break down the more long-running processes is use a combination of technology, and they actually used tools like well, they're using Fargate now, but they use more the EC2 instances, because not everything is going to be a serverless function. I mean, transcoding a big video into an MP4 is not going to be a serverless function, because in AWS, a Lambda function runs for a maximum of 5 minutes, and then it just stops execution. So if you expect that your service invocation is going to run longer than 5 minutes, then you can do two things. You can either persist state and have something else pick it up again, which is really difficult to do, or you can make use of something like Fargate, where you can just spin up a container and let that take care of the longer running tasks for you. which is also why I think that containers and serverless together are such a great fit.
Maybe a question, I think it's very relevant. With the customers you're working with, or the clients, do they use all AWS, or do they also use private clouds, like internal kind of?
Absolutely. So, I should say absolutely to the second part of your question. We see a lot of our customers looking at cloud. A lot, as they choose cloud, go to AWS simply because they are the largest. Though we do see more and more Microsoft Azure being chosen. But as they're moving to cloud, they do want to keep some of their stuff on-prem, either regulatory or for some other reason. And yes, they are using a lot of private cloud technologies as well, using stuff like OpenShift or Cloud Foundry, and trying to build their own private cloud.
Yeah, we have also some of my customers use also private cloud in AWS. So they have a private cloud for them in AWS.
So it really depends on where do you want to run your services.
Sorry for asking again.
No, that's okay. I mean, that's why we're here.
Also, the Flogo can run as a container, right?
Yes.
On Kubernetes.
Yes.
What is the typical size of the document? Because we are looking on a container edition for the business world, which size is really, really huge. I hope Flogo is really little.
So it's an interesting question, and I used to have a slide on that in my deck, where we talked about the size of a typical Docker container, and we compared the ones from Mule to BusinessWorks Container Edition to one for Flogo. And to be honest, I don't remember the exact number for Mule again, but it was around 400 or 500 megabytes. The one for BusinessWorks Container Edition at the time was around 250, 300, if I recall correctly, and the one for Flogo was around 4.5, just 4.5 period. Yeah, I should have the slide somewhere, but
But more or less it was.
yeah.
Because, for example, there was a big obstacle for us when we like jump on the container edition. Now realizing, oh crap, 4,000 containers,
Yeah.
1,500 megabytes.
You're right.
It wouldn't work.
So the good part about Flogo or Golang in general is that it's a statically compiled binary. So as you compile it, you can run it where it is you want, because all the dependencies are embedded into it. It doesn't need any additional Linux kernel headers or whatever. Everything is embedded into it, and that's the reason why you can very easily put it onto one of those super small Linux Docker images like Alpine. If you look at the Flogo CLI, and there was actually a lab on that on our documentation page, we talk about how you can create a super small Docker image using the Flogo CLI, which then in turn uses Alpine.
30 or 40K, the CLI. It was quite small footprint.
It isn't that big. I mean, and if you really want to, you can actually run it on a scratch container as well. Assuming you make sure that the underlying OS is, similar to what you compiled it for. That was a good question. I liked it.
Are there questions on YouTube?
Wait, you can ask questions on YouTube?
No.
I mean, I don't know.
Comments, huh?
Sorry?
If you type it in the
Oh, actually, that's true. Yes.
Yeah, it's good to check.
I mean, it's probably going to comment saying something like, can a Dutch guy please stop talking? I'm talking about me, obviously.
You guys aren't hungry, obviously.
Hmm? Good.
Nothing's coming out of the chat. Guys, last chance, last call. For the one last lightning question.
How does Flogo harmonize with other TIBCO products?
How does it, what do you exactly mean with harmonize?
Does it take some functionality of Mashery, or does it complement Mashery?
Complement.
Does it help with BusinessWorks? That kind of,
So it complements the other technology. I mean, can you do certain things in the same way? Absolutely. I mean, that's going to be true for any technology that you create. But in this case, I would much rather talk about how it complements the other things. So, for example, what Mashery does amazingly well is API management. Obviously, it doesn't fulfill things like transformations and stuff like that, as you need to build additional adapters for that. That is absolutely a task for the micro gateway action within Flogo. If you look at what BusinessWorks does incredibly well, it's hardcore integration. It's working with proprietary protocols, with things like SOAP, with huge XML messages. Flogo is a super small engine that can absolutely run beside it to do other tasks like handling JSON payloads, that kind of stuff. So I much more see those technologies complementary to each other than say that, hey, one is taking over the other. Which is also one of the reasons why, as you go to, for example, TIBCO Cloud, as you log in, you'll see that all of those technologies are together in one cloud.
So if you look at an IoT device, you can really deploy like Java or other type of language. You need to have a small engine. And the Flogo is the engine that you can run the code. You can rule, you can machine learning model, also in a Raspberry Pi.
Though I've seen people try to deploy a huge Java app onto a device like that.
So that is also, there are different use cases, and they are complementary.
Yeah.
Does it also complement other company products you are using, not using Azure, but some other API gateway?
You could, absolutely.
There is an API,
Yeah.
API, you can call from any other type of technology. You can call it.
Obviously, I would prefer it if you use our tech, but hey.
So you mentioned that you can export flows via JSON and of course import them as well.
Yeah.
To what extent do you already see flows published on different platforms that you can also reuse, like open source flows?
So most of the companies I've been working with so far are still keeping their flows in-house.
Not that you can find a free chatbot somewhere like this.
Actually, in that case, you could. At least a Slack chatbot, and I know that because I created that one. But yeah, we do see that people are much more comfortable sharing the extensions that they've built, so the activities, the triggers, that kind of stuff, as opposed to entire apps. Because they still are sort of keeping that as their IP, which also kind of makes sense.
So shall we then give Leon a round of applause? So Leon, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes. So I just want to say one closing comment. So we're delayed a bit with the start by 15 minutes, so we're doing pretty much good on time.
Good.
Yeah. So I suggest we go grab some food quickly. We go come back, and because of the 15-time shift, the next session will start 1:15, and not as at 1 o'clock as originally anticipated. And please try to think about some of the ideas that you want to put on the board. That we will ask Leon to show how awesome Flogo actually is. All right. So on this note, guys, once
Really
again,
awesome.
and let's run.